good to hear that music on this Wednesday afternoon, and that means it's time for Helping Seniors of Brevard. Kerry Fink is standing by. Kerry is the Executive Director of Helping Seniors of Brevard and the host of the show, and Kerry has a special guest for today. Good afternoon, Kerry.
Hey, good afternoon, John Harper. It's always good to gather around the radio Wednesdays at lunchtime. And this is going to be an interesting topic for us to consider, considering that it is lunchtime. So on behalf of our entire Helping Seniors of Brevard team, thank you for making Wednesdays right here at 90.3 FM WEJF part of your weekday, midday planning. And if you're listening to us online at WEJF.net, thank you for tuning in. And also, if you've joined us by podcast, we appreciate that very much. And if you're listening on the radio, by the way, a lot of people love to go back and take a hold of that podcast, available wherever you find a podcast. That could be any place from Apple iTunes to iHeartRadio, Spotify, you name it. If they got YouTube has podcasts now, wherever you'll find a podcast, you'll find Helping Seniors Radio. And what we've learned over the years, because Helping Seniors as a nonprofit that's engaged in educating folks about all the things that you as a senior, you as a person loving and caring for a senior, or in a couple of years when you will be a senior, all these things are designed to help you navigate your own aging plan. As our founder, Joe Steckler, has often talked about, we all need to have that so that we can live our best life that we can, given all the different constraints, and an aging plan is part of that. But the point I wanted to get to was to say that a lot of times people will listen to the radio show and they'll say, wow, this would be perfect for Bob or Janet to hear, and I wish they could hear what they're talking about today. I think this is going to be a good one, and you're going to enjoy it. So that's one of the reasons the podcasts are available, so you can go back after the fact, or maybe you missed part of the show, and you can grab a hold of that and make it available to somebody that it will benefit in your family or that you love and care about. So with kind of that as an introduction, we're going to speak to a noted area periodontist. He's a longtime, in fact, he was helping Joe Steckler, not only as he got the Helping Seniors organization going, but going all the way back to when Joe was busy building those Brevard Alzheimer Foundation facilities, the daycare, the lovely daycare facilities that they've been operating all these years, called Joe's Clubs, named after Joe. But I'm talking about, and he's on our board now. Thank you, Dr. Lee Sheldon. How are you this morning?
I'm okay, Kerry, and I am hot. Let me tell you, I'm hot. And I got hot as soon as I heard the first public service announcement about UVA and UVB rays. Oh, my goodness. It tells the story so precisely. So for those of you who are listening to the podcast and did not hear the public service announcement from the Food and Drug Administration, what they talked about was the use of some sunscreen and a sun protective factor of 15 or more in order to prevent the cancerous damage that are caused by UVA and UVB rays, right? You heard that, Kerry, right?
Yes, I did.
And we all believe that, don't we?
Well, I would imagine so.
And the Food and Drug Administration told us that that's true, correct?
Sure.
It did. How true is that? And did we get skin cancer 100 years ago to the same degree that we do now? And the answer is a clear no. Did the sun change in the past 100 years? No. What has changed is our environment, what we're breathing, and what we're eating, which make us more susceptible to the damage that occurs from UVA and UVB rays. And that's the topic of today's conversation.
You know, that is so important, because that's what I thought was kind of ironic, because we always, when we're planning these things out, we kind of go back and forth and say, well, what's a good topic that we should be talking about when we get together and do our radio at lunchtime on Wednesdays? And so Dr. Sheldon says, well, let's talk about a title that's going to get everybody's attention. We are eating ourselves to death. And so the first thing that I always have to think about, Dr. Sheldon, when we have a topic like that is, number one, with no disrespect, you're an expert on mouth health. I mean, that's what your entire career is. We've joked that you're the father or grandfather, or however we want to say it, of dental implants. And yet You literally lead and guide now a lot of the industry because you're involved in research capacities. You're also involved in helping other dental practices, periodontal practices do the best they can. But you've always looked at the entire body as saying, well, there's more than just the mouth. And so we've done a lot of shows about nutrition and things like that. And I thought, here we are, we're going to talk about, we are eating ourselves to death. And I remember studies that we've talked about on the radio and TV before that have shown what a link there is between mouth health and some of your other health. And so I guess this really does have to do with mouth health because it has to do with what you're putting in your mouth.
It's true. I mean, if we look at periodontal disease, listen, there's been efforts, probably in some ways with good reason, to separate out the mouth from the rest of the body. After all, physicians go to medical school, they learn nearly nothing about the mouth. By the way, it's dentists, we learn a lot about the body. And so the physicians default to the dentist for anything that's within the area occupied by the tongue and the teeth. So that's one part. And when we look at insurance, well, medical insurance doesn't cover dental care. So it's like dental has been separated off from a financial standpoint. But to think that the mouth health doesn't reflect what's going on in the rest of the body, or what goes on in the mouth doesn't affect the rest of the body, that is becoming more and more well known as we're finding out that some of the lesions that we have in the mouth, the infections, that type of thing, actually have a direct effect on cancer, on heart disease, and a number of chronic degenerative diseases. And so while there's been an effort to separate these off, you can't ignore what's going on with regard to chronic degenerative disease. And periodontal disease, which is the disease that causes people to lose ligament support and bone support for the teeth, is a chronic degenerative disease, just like arthritis is, just like heart disease is, just like any of the other chronic degenerative diseases that we have. And we can't just say, well, it's just plaque or it's just calculus, although we talk about calculus and fractured calculus and what we need to do in order to be able to get that off, in order to be able to take care of the disease. We still can't say that that's the only thing, that there is an inflammatory capacity to that, and that inflammation is very much influenced by what we eat. And if we're eating the improper things, then we're not able to fight disease as well as we might if we're eating good foods.
You know, I was going to say, I don't mean to be leading the witness, and you can tell me if I'm not barking up the right trail, but I think in some of the things that we've talked about, and I was thinking about how you opened the show and you said, you know, some of the problems that we have today, maybe we didn't have 100 years ago. And I think that you're going to lead us down the path because I'm cheating, folks. I have a copy of the article that's going to be coming out in the Senior Scene magazine because Dr. Sheldon is also kind enough to take the topics that we talk about. You get to hear them first here on the radio, and then he expands on them when you pull out your copy of Senior Scene magazine and are able to look at each month's edition. There's always some good things for you to get a hold of. But I think one of the points that you probably would be prepared to make the argument for is that we're eating too much sugar.
Oh, there's no question about it. 100 years ago, we ate between 4 to 6 pounds of sugar a year, and now some studies are saying we eat 100 pounds of sugar, perhaps even 150 pounds of sugar a year. And that has its effect. Sugar in any form is inflammatory. It's less inflammatory if we're going to natural sugars like honey or maple syrup, but that doesn't mean we don't, that we can drink a maple syrup diet. That isn't the idea. But when we're talking about sugar and how sugar is hidden in all of or most of the processed foods that we use under the names of maltodextrin and sucralose and that type of thing, then we are sneaking a lot of sugar into our systems. Sugar is highly inflammatory. It will directly result in all the chronic degenerative diseases and all of the life-threatening diseases that we're talking about. The body cannot adapt to from 4 to 6 pounds up to 100 pounds in 1 century. The body does not adapt to that and doesn't adapt to that very well. And it means that those things that we're eating, which are primarily packaged foods, things that come in a can or a box, which you and I have talked about forever on this program, they're hurting us. They're just hurting us.
I think this is an interesting conversation from the standpoint that when we look at diet and the impact that it has on us, I've often made probably what's more judgmental of a thought than I should have, that you look around today and it seems like although they tell us we're supposed to be more active and keep that side of things going, that so often, because I guess we go home and we could play video games or we're watching TV or we're doing things we're maybe not as active as we should be, it seems like overall we might be getting heavier. But I think the other part of that could be that our diet isn't helping us correctly in that side of things either.
Well, we had literally no obesity 100 years ago, and now obesity is common. It's 45% of the population. I mean, this is just a tremendous change that's occurred in a relatively short period of time, and the consequent factors, which was just proven to us during COVID. COVID, they try to make that an equal opportunity disease. It wasn't. For the most part, people who were obese were the ones who were dying. And so, but we don't want to fat shame and all of these other things, which have very much to do with public relations. And frankly, it has a lot to do with money. Because the pharmaceutical companies are tied into the food industry and they want to sell their product. And so we can't fat shame because, God forbid, that's going to hurt us. It's going to hurt us psychologically when, in fact, the foods that we're eating, the foods that are being produced for us, and the foods that are being allowed and the chemicals that are being allowed in this country that aren't allowed in other countries are killing us. And that's the title of this. We are eating ourselves to death. We are.
Although I think, and again, I think I'm probably leading the witness a little bit, but, we have in this country, you always think of like, well, we have a pretty robust government. If stuff is supposed to come out, it's supposed to be FDA cleared. And, there's all these organizations that are supposed to protect us, the CDC, the USDA. I mean, when we go to the grocery store, we buy a package of meat, it says USDA approved. And, we look for all these labels, but it almost sounds like you're saying we might be getting either intentionally or unintentionally misled.
Well, the purpose of these organizations was, and I emphasize was, to protect us. But now if we look at the FDA, the USDA, the CDC, let's just take the Food and Drug Administration itself. We find that those people who serve as governors on the Food and Drug Administration worked for the pharmaceutical companies, then they work for a short time at the FDA or maybe a longer time, and they go back to the pharmaceutical companies. The ties between pharmaceutical companies and FDA are legion. And so the purpose of the Food and Drug Administration was to determine safety and efficacy of our drugs. Safety is obvious. Efficacy means that they work. If you have somebody who's so intimately tied into the pharmaceutical company, tell me, how objective are you going to be? And that's the problem with these agencies. The agencies were designed for a particular purpose, but they're no longer serving that purpose.
This may be off-roading on this a little bit, but I was thinking about the fact that a lot of times if you'll talk to a medical doctor, they have no problem whipping out a prescription pad and saying, okay, here's what you should take for this particular condition. In fact, I'm seeing a lot of TV ads right now, Dr. Sheldon, that are like, oh, this one helps somebody, lose 20 pounds in a year or things like that. It's somehow you go to the doctor and you get this prescription and all of a sudden all your other challenges go away. And yet oftentimes maybe, and I don't know if it's the training or it's just the system, that same doctor may kind of look down their nose at maybe a supplement or something like that, some people might say, well, this is a holistic way that you get this more naturally, because they'll say it wasn't measured by the FDA or something like that. I'm just curious what your thought is about that whole topic when it comes up.
Well, I think if we have to look basically at the funding, then we find that the funding of medical schools comes from a great deal from pharmaceutical companies. So understand that there's an intentional bias there. And so if you're educated without intentional bias, then in fact, you're going to say, well, this is the only thing that works and the rest of it is hooey. The problem here is that if you have developed your entire research base, your faculty base, based on what others are saying, and those are the highly respected individuals who are funded either directly or indirectly from the pharmaceutical company, that inserts a bias among those healthcare practitioners, primarily MDs and perhaps DOs, who are educated by those people. And so they may think they're telling the truth, but that truth has been colored by what they received during their medical education. I have a good friend who's a physician who will verify that. And in fact, some of the things that he's learned over the years when he found out that pharmaceutical medicine didn't do everything, he's now applying to those patients that he consults with. The unfortunate part of this is there's an awful lot of name calling that occurs in the name of what people presume is health, but in fact may not be healthy for us at all. And that's being spelled out with the amount of disease and now what seems to be a decreasing lifespan within our population.
You know, that's an interesting point that I was going to ask you about. I remember thinking growing up that America seemed to have, or the United States, I guess more specifically, would typically have one of the highest average lifespans in general. And it does seem, is this right, that it's actually been shrinking a little bit? Maybe it's post-COVID, I'm not sure, but it does seem like it's not growing the way it was.
Well, it's interesting how lifespan is measured, Kerry, and it's measured based on life expectancy from the date of birth. And so if we have a lot of kids dying in childbirth, that reduces the overall life expectancy. And so when we solved problems of infections many years ago with antibiotics, then we found, or other medications, we found that more people who were being born would live a longer period of time. And that would be the reason for the extended lifespan. Now, I'm not saying that's the only thing, but that certainly is a significant number. And so we tend to be misled by the statistic, but not understand where that statistic is derived.
That's an interesting conversation just by itself when you think about it. You know, I was thinking too.
You know, by the way, this may be my last show.
Oh no!
No, I mean, if somebody listens to it, then they may who's interested in what I'm saying, they may not like what I'm saying.
Well, anyway. You know, you've never been shy about tackling tougher topics. And I thought, you know, again, that's why I couched it kind of at the beginning is like, it's interesting because we have done the shows where you've talked about how the body goes or how the mouth goes. It's so interrelated. So one of the questions, you know, I think I kind of smile. My wife, Tammy, she had, when we lived in New York City, she had a doctor that she really, really trusted. And she was in fact, she'll still call her from time to time and ask her a question. But she's a doctor that was a full-blown MD, but she was actually of Russian heritage. And for whatever reason, she came up understanding the medical side of it, but very much like you, was very, very concerned about diet and things like that, and looking for non-prescription ways to resolve issues. So it became a joke. Every time we would go to the doctor's office, she would say, "How about some nice organic veggies? And let's try this instead of that." And she would have all these solutions that would seem to be correct. And then even we have he's been our family doctor for years, and here he's like, "Okay, let's talk Mediterranean diet. Let's talk about where you're sourcing your foods." And I guess that was a question I wanted to ask you also, is like, there's all these controversies out here. Like some things say GMO and some say not GMO. And there's all these different, things that makes it tough for a consumer to try to figure out, okay, if I'm going to take a stab at doing this right, then I go to the grocery store and I might even get more confused. I don't know.
Yeah, look at advertising and look at public relations. We're seeing a lot of that now, and we've been seeing that for years. It's just so obvious to us now. So what's GMO mean? It means genetically modified organisms. So that means that it's been taken in nature and then has been modified in some way. So that's GMO. And so we put in the label non-GMO. So we can take sugar that's minimally processed and we can call that non-genetically modified. And we say that's safe because it's non-GMO. It says that on the label. But no, that's not true at all. Sugar is sugar. And so we're caught in PR advertising that type of thing in order to encourage us to buy something. Now, you won't see an apple that says non-GMO, but you will see apple chips that say non-GMO.
Wow.
The thing is, it becomes a read the label type of thing. We are required by the USDA to list everything that's on the label. Or everything that's in the food, list that on the label. But even then, you'll see a designation called natural flavors. Well, it sounds good, doesn't it? Natural flavors. Wow,
sure.
I'm getting natural. You can say anything you want. Natural flavors are highly processed flavors, but you can call it natural. So you've got to be careful and understand the meaning of every ingredient. It's a pain in the neck, but we're all intelligent. We can learn how to read labels. We might have to go to a dictionary a couple of times in order to be able to find out what some of these things mean. But once we find out what they mean, then we can be in a better position to be able to serve ourselves and serve ourselves better. So, for years, McDonald's used to make their French fries using beef tallow. Oh, that's horrible. It came from an animal. It's no good. Saturated fat, all the type of stuff. So what do? They changed to a highly inflammatory oil. I'm not sure whether it was safflower oil, sunflower oil, corn oil, canola oil. I'm not sure what it was, in order to be able to make it okay for people to buy the stuff. Well, it turns out these oils are highly inflammatory, and those are actually more responsible for heart disease. And so we get into what's acceptable in order to be able to sell the product, rather than find out what's really behind it and what we can do to make ourselves as healthy as possible. By the way, I'm not saying the French fries are healthy no matter which way you do it, but I'm just giving an example of what was modified due to public opinion.
Yeah, I was smiling because literally you always talk about when you go to the grocery store, you're supposed to shop the outside ring of the grocery store where it's more healthy. But I have to confess, was in a grocery store and they had a BOGO offer on a packaged cereal without naming names. It had little O's and it said it was honey nut sweetened. And so caved and bought 2 of those. And Tammy and I had actually that for dessert last night. And we were both snickering because on the front of the package it said, helps lower cholesterol. And so we're being sort of smirky and saying, wow, isn't this good? We're lowering our cholesterol by having dessert.
Good. Yeah, have some ice cream along with that. That'd be good.
I'm all for it. Everything in moderation, Dr. Sheldon, I guess. So,
yeah, we can talk about, we've talked about moderation before, Kerry.
Yeah.
Even the definition of moderation has changed in the past 100 years.
That's right. Do you want that supersized, right? That's become a term that we didn't grow up with.
It's true, but let me get into politics for a second, and then I'll get quickly out of it.
Okay, because we're going to mid-show break. So yes,
go to the mid-show break. We'll talk about politics when we get back. How about that?
Okay,
we'll talk about how this is intimately involved in what we're talking about today.
Oh, it sounds good. Stick around. You won't want to miss the conversation coming up with Dr. Lee Sheldon next on Helping Seniors Radio.
And we're getting ready now for the second half of Helping Seniors of Brevard, as we reintroduce to you the host of Helping Seniors of Brevard and the executive director of the organization as well. Here's Kerry Fink. Kerry?
Hey, thank you, John Harper. Always fun to continue the lunchtime gathering right here on 90.3 FM WEJF, online at WEJF.net. And for those listening on podcast, thank you for continuing to enjoy the broadcast, hopefully getting some good information out of it, because we have an interesting topic that we always joke is that it's our lunchtime gathering, because we, hopefully are able to take some sort of a midday break and enjoy a delicious repast in the midday. And we're talking about this topic, we are eating ourselves to death, with Dr. Lee Sheldon, noted area periodontist. He has spent a lot of his career also in looking at the links between mouth health and health, as if there was really a difference. And I guess maybe that's where we begin. Although just as we had come around the bend to the mid-show break, we were going to speak politically, I think.
We were going to speak politically, and it's something that will get some of you mad. So go ahead, get mad. Getting mad at me. I had people mad at me my entire career. Robert F. Kennedy. Okay, so Robert F. Kennedy, that will send alarm bells through a lot of you. Say, oh, horrible person. He's aligned with Trump. Whatever it is, you're gonna say that. Let's look at what Robert F. Kennedy and who he is. Robert F. Kennedy is an attorney. He took on cases that fought against the Food and Drug Administration. He was an environmental lawyer and still is. He's fighting the establishment. And so you'll hear bad things about Robert. And by the way, he wrote the book Fauci and talked about the inherent nature of what's occurred within that, that individual and the people that are associated with that individual. Understand there's and Robert F. Kennedy's book was very, very well documented. If you want to read that about Fauci, essentially it does talk about his history, most recently with COVID, but even before with AIDS and how how those therapies were developed and how they were promoted. If you look at that, you'll say, all right, this guy is making others mad and he's getting people to the point where, or companies to the point where, if what he said was true, and if it got out there, then people would be less likely to support the status quo within the USDA, the FDA, CDC, and other organizations. So you see somebody who's being denigrated in public because he's aligned himself with somebody who doesn't even match his political leanings, but is willing to allow him, meaning Kennedy, to go in and clean up the corruption that's within our health administration. And what's the obvious reaction going to be? Oh, we've got to make sure that everybody knows he's a bad guy, and therefore you think bad of him, so you attack his character, when in fact what he is saying may very well be true. Or if he's not sure it's true, he's saying we've got to do research in this area in order to be able to verify it's true. Example, oh, he's an anti-vaxxer. If you listen to Kennedy, Kennedy will say, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I want safety and efficacy approved or determined before we actually use that vaccine on people. Now, we found out just recently with the COVID vaccines that, in fact, we had the test group and we had the experimental group. The test group and the control group. And the control group didn't receive the vaccine and the test group did. What happened was they said, all right, those people who received the vaccine in the short term, which was in a few months, they did better in some way than the people who received the placebo or the non-vaccine. So what did they then say? They said, well, this vaccine is working so well that we've got to take the control group and we've got to give them the vaccine too in order to be able to protect them. So essentially your control group no longer exists and you can't look at the long-term effects of the vaccine because all of those people were vaccinated too. That's an example of what's occurred just recently in order to be able to muddy the research so that in fact we have no control group and we can't look at what the data is 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line.
Wow. I think all these it's kind of like just questioning the status quo a little bit. And that brings me, because in the article, you also talk about a doctor, Casey Means, who was an MD and a former surgical resident. And you were explaining that she left her residency to focus on preventing disease through better nutrition and lifestyle choices. And she's got a book called Good Energy. And you seem to speak very highly, like it's a must read.
It is a must read. It's number one on Amazon last week and this week. So, it is. And I'm recommending to my patients that it's, in fact, the assistants are so used to it, they've got it already pre-printed out on a piece of paper so they don't have to write it down each time. Casey Means, she couldn't be 40. She's probably less than 40. And you imagine somebody who was top of her class at Stanford Medical School. Now, Stanford is that's a highly, highly rated medical school. And then she goes to University of Oregon for an ear, nose, and throat residency. And it's a surgical residency. That surgical residency is 5 years. And in her fifth year, she's repairing the sinus on a younger individual, and she finally gets done with the procedure and says, I'm not doing people any good. I'm repairing them, when in fact they could have prevented this problem from occurring to begin with. And so after $500,000 in debt, she's ready to finish her surgical residency. I mean, she's all set up. She says, the heck with this, I'm leaving and I'm going to go into functional medicine. And she did. And she is in functional medicine in Portland, Oregon. She and her brother, Kelly Means, have published this book. She's the primary author. Kelly Means is much more involved in healthcare policy. And she goes back to the science, and she looks back at some of the things that we think we know, but we don't know, and actually shows how we can take care of our health a lot better. She's even established a company where you can go to LabCorp, you can run blood tests, and they will be interpreted by Casey Means' company called Levels to look at particular indicators and see where you are and what you can do to improve your own health without medications. So this person is, for those of you who are younger, I know this is helping seniors, but for those of you who are younger, Casey Means is going to be and her brother Kelly are going to be a powerful force in the next 30 or 40 years.
Interesting. Good Energy is the book by Dr. Casey Means. But I was going to say to you, Dr. Sheldon, I think one of the things that I've gathered in talking with you, and actually a number of other folks who are involved in senior care, is that kind of like they say, like, if you're smoking, quit. It doesn't matter how long you've been smoking or how old you are, quit. It's still going to have beneficial benefits. And I think that's kind of the point here. There's nothing going to be harmful about taking a more healthy track on any of this.
No, right now, if we're listening to the commercials, you talked about the weight loss drugs, the anti-diabetes drugs, and these things are costing $1,500 a month or whatever they're costing in order to be able to reduce your weight. That's not going to produce a long-term advantage to you. If you think a drug is going to make a difference, yes, you'll lose weight, but you'll be dependent on the drug, and you don't know in the long term what those drugs are going to do. But there's already indications that certainly those drugs aren't helping you. Instead, you take the natural approach, go back to where you were or where we were when we were buying food that was actually produced by the local farmer, and the local farmer, and what that person is doing in order to be able to grow those foods correctly and protect you. That's the direction that she talks about going in, Dr. Casey Means, and that would be good for you, because we're going back to foods that are there to nourish the body. When you take foods that nourish the body, you get full faster. If you're eating the right foods, you're going to eat less because you can't eat anymore. You just can't eat anymore. As soon as you introduce some of these factors that become addictive or make it taste better, which also makes it addictive, you can eat more and more and more. So you could eat all you want of a meat, and you can only eat a certain amount of meat. Okay, now I'm a vegetarian, but we'll talk about it from a meat perspective. You can't eat any more steak. You just can't do it. But put a nice sweetened dessert in, all of a sudden you can eat more, can't you? That's the idea here. You can, if it's nourishing the body will say enough, and your hunger pangs will turn off. But as soon as you introduce these chemicals or sweeteners or inflammatory oils or processed foods into the system, well, you can just eat and eat and eat. Give me a bag of potato chips, okay? I'm done with that bag. Good. I'll have another bag. And I keep on eating another bag because I'm not getting what I need. The body is craving nutrition and is hoping the next time I eat that next chip, it's going to get the nutrition it needs, but it doesn't. And so you keep on eating and eating and eating and eating. We get fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter.
I was just going to bring up the potato chip analogy if you hadn't, because I was going to say it's almost like they tell people who are recovering, working their way through like an AA program to say, one chip is too many, and then a whole bag of chips is not enough, because it is amazing how you get certain foods and they tasty at the time, and you just mow through it. And then when you're done, you're like, well, I'm still hungry. And I think that you're putting your thumb on the pulse of all that. So here's the question. You're talking a lot about we've covered so many areas. We've talked about the food labels. We've talked about books we ought to read. We've talked about trying to understand the impact that what we eat has on our overall health. But how do you go about it when you're shopping for food, Dr. Sheldon?
I like, so I have my favorite food store. It doesn't have to be, it could be any food store. You have your favorite one that you go to, and you go into the fresh section. So I look in the fresh section and get as much as I can with non-processed grown food. Okay. I would prefer to have things that aren't even packaged. By the way, the next thing you're going to see, it's coming up in the next 2 years. It's already coming up now, but it'll be more public, will be the amount of plastic that we're eating. Notice everything we're getting is wrapped in plastic.
Oh, wow.
And while they are talking about certain parts of the plastic, I think it's the World Wildlife Federation says we're eating the equivalent of one credit card per day. That's not going to fly for us either. And so you're going to see plastics attacks. So I would prefer it not be packaged food. And then I've got to decide whether I'm going to put it in the plastic bag or whether I'm just going to put it in my regular bag that I bring from home. It sounds weird. Oh, he's nuts. No, the things that we are doing to ourselves now are not okay. So yes, I'll go to the produce section. I'll get everything that I can out of the produce section. Yes, some of them are packaged in plastic. So, for example, I got tofu this morning. Tofu is packaged in plastic. Someday it won't be, but right now it is. If I'm eating meat, I will go to the meat section and I will get the meat. I won't get the meat that's frozen in the bag that's already been pre-cooked, because that's something else. No, I'll get the straight meat or the straight fish and eat that. The problem becomes when you start eating foods that are created or cooked or processed by somebody else. The old statement I used to make, which I'm sure I stole from somebody else, was the machine ate all the good stuff and you're getting everything else. It's those types of things which are prepared, where all you have to do is warm them up, when in fact, if you look at the label, they're full of these highly processed oils, canola oil, safflower oil, and sugars and that type of thing. And they aren't good for you. And so that if you avoid that and go to fresh, and these days it's so easy to get a simple recipe on YouTube and just make it. You can do it very fast. You can cook dinner in a half an hour and get back into normal good foods for yourself, rather than foods that taste good, seem easier. You can defrost it or don't defrost it. Just put it in the oven and think you're getting something, when in fact you're not getting real food.
Yeah. Well, interesting topic for today. We are eating ourselves to death. Before I'm going to reserve some time toward the end of the show, because we're getting close to the big date of October 27th and the Helping Seniors 8th annual Choose Your Adventure car raffle. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we get there, Dr. Sheldon, I do want to talk about Dr. Sheldon and Furtado, because you guys have been friends of the Helping Seniors organization, like we were talking about before, since Joe Steckler founded this group, now going into our 14th year of service. And you have a wonderful, because this is kind of our fundraiser corner anyway, you have a wonderful fundraiser opportunity that is not only good for us, meaning the Helping Seniors nonprofit, because we can't do what we do without your help, but it's actually a neat way to take advantage of getting a real good dental exam and learn everything that's going on and how to keep everything the right way going on in your mouth. It's called Solid Bite Gives Back. Can you share about that?
I can. As a matter of fact, I just saw 2 patients yesterday. It was probably more than 2. maybe I was aware, who came in as a result of the Solid Bite Gives Back program,
Good.
which essentially means you come into our office, either referred from somebody, or you've, because we have many doctors who refer to our office, or you've heard us on Helping Seniors of Brevard, and you say, hey, I heard Kerry talk with this weird dentist, and he's got this program. Can I get into that? And you call 321-259-8000. You get a comprehensive examination, including CT scan and all the regular x-rays for $50. Just bring in a check and write a check for $50 or more. We had somebody write $100 last week to Helping Seniors of Brevard County, and you get the examination for no charge. That means a 2-hour experience. You get a full evaluation as to what we feel is necessary. A good example yesterday is we had a patient come in and a certain amount of treatment was recommended. And I know we're a fancy office and we do fancy dentistry. I told her, you don't need all that. You only need this. And so she's spending half with us that was recommended by somebody else. So there are a lot of things that occur during a comprehensive examination. And part of that is not just talking about what we do, which we do very well. And it's easy for me to compliment them because I don't do the work anymore. The kids do the work. I just evaluate you and I tell you what needs to be done. But also when you should have something done and when you shouldn't have something done or when you don't need it. And so we pride ourselves in doing what's necessary and giving you a full evaluation so you can understand where you are now, where we expect you to be 5 or 10 years from now. 2-hour experience and $50 or more to Helping Seniors of Brevard. Just call the office 321-259-8000. Say you heard me on Helping Seniors of Brevard, and anybody who answers the phone will be able to help you with that.
Yeah, it's kind of a win-win-win for us. And thank you, Dr. Sheldon, for joining us. We're going to kind of shift a gear. I'm going to actually ask John Harper and Jim Votro because we're going to into the conversation because we're going to talk a little bit now for a few minutes about the upcoming Choose Your Adventure Helping Seniors car raffle. And I don't know, John, you don't get enough credit oftentimes. John has been vice president of the Helping Seniors organization going back to the day that Joe founded the group. And in fact, was there with Joe when he was building those Joe's clubs for the Brevard Alzheimer's Foundation. And in fact, you actually got Joe Steckler started in the radio game all those years ago. But one of the things is I wanted to ask you. You know, Joe always talked about the fact that he began with his friend AJ Hires doing car raffles to raise money, going back to those Brevard Alzheimer's days. And here we are. He said that was like in the mid '90s that they got together, starting all that. John.
Well, it was. It does go back that far, Kerry, and with the help of so many great people like the Boniface Hires organization, it's really been able to give us a leg up on trying to get the fundraisers to become successful and to create awareness of the organization, first starting with the Brevard Alzheimer's Foundation, and now, of course, Helping Seniors of Brevard. And we certainly thank all of the efforts, all of the help that Boniface Hires, AJ Hires has done to make that happen and to put us on the map.
Yeah, you know, I always remind people, I said, when we come begging for money, which is what nonprofits really have to do, because as I always explained, there's no ulterior motive for an organization like Helping Seniors of Brevard. We only exist to serve seniors here in Brevard County. And right. We've always talked about we're 100% local to Brevard County. We make sure that the partners and the people that we work with are kind of boots on the ground. Like when we just had a great conversation with Dr. Lee Sheldon. He's been bedrock in the community here. He leads the way nationally and internationally on a lot of the things that we've talked about in terms of dental and periodontist research. And so what Joe has been able to do over the years is pull together all these wonderful people who are dedicated to seniors. But this is why this car raffle is so important, John, because this is half of our budget every year. When we can only do as and help as much as people help us to help. And so I think that's probably how this came about. Everybody's looking for a fun way as opposed to just say, oh, just write us a check and support us. But this is a way you can write a check or use your credit card or however, pay cash, whatever you want to do, get some car raffle tickets. And it adds a whole dimension of fun to the fact that you're doing something good for your community, John.
Well, it does, Kerry, Fink, and the fun factor, I think, is very important. And as you said, not only are you doing something good for the community, for the organization, but also the opportunity to win a car is kind of special through this particular event that we have had now. We're into what, our 8th year?
Yeah, that's right. And yeah. And that's what's so fun. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, we've come a long way. I believe when we first started doing this with helping seniors of Brevard, we had a 1949 Ford in pristine condition, refurbished, I would imagine, by A.J. Hires. It was one of his collection, and that was very special. But now we're looking at a whole list of cars from the A.J. Hires, Boniface Hires organization that you'll be able to give us a list of what cars are possible in this particular event. But we've come a long way.
Yeah, it's so funny. And I guess how we got into somebody can win a new car on Sunday, October 27th, because Mark Pylock, the owner of the American Muscle Car Museum, that fantastic collection of just top-notch showcase cars, millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars worth of cars, if not hundreds of millions of cars in his facility right there at 3500 Sarno Road. But, he's made that possible for us. But what I wanted to come back to and say what was interesting is the first year, A.J. Hires gave us that Ford Hot Rod out of his personal collection. And then the winner, who was a local person, bought tickets for years supporting Joe's work, said, this is great. I don't know what to do with a hot rod. I'm not a car collector, but I really want a Jeep. And somehow behind the scenes, he and AJ worked it out, and he drives home in a Jeep, and AJ keeps his beautiful car in his collection. And so when Joe went back to AJ the next year and said, hey, could we give away a new car? And AJ said, sure, I'll help you guys do that. And so that's how the sort of the choose your adventure car raffle became, because AJ has 5 great car dealerships here in Brevard County. So it's almost one of everything that matters. And you can take your pick, everything from a Dodge Hornet, which is kind of a sporty little car, to a Chevrolet Colorado pick-em-up truck, to a Mazda Miata convertible is in the running. There's a couple of SUVs, the really nice Kia Outlander, Kia Sportage. We gave one of those away a couple of years back, and then the Mitsubishi Outlander, which we gave away last year. There's also a Mazda 3, a beautiful little sedan in there. So, and a Jeep, even a Jeep Compass Sport is in there. So many good cars to choose from, but you got to get a ticket to be in it to win it. It's pretty simple, John. One ticket is a $25, and then 5 tickets for $100. And what that does is that supports the work of helping seniors. It's each ticket is, of course, a chance in the car raffle. And on top of that, you're invited to the grand drawing event. You don't have to be present to win, but Sunday it's going to be a great outdoor, indoor event. You'll be able to check out all of Mark's great cars, and we'll have stuff in the parking lot too. Yeah,
indeed. It is, Kerry. And one more thing before we say goodbye for this Wednesday afternoon, but that American Muscle Car Museum is a must-see. The cars that are on display there, just incredible, and you definitely want to check it out. So it's kind of a double win. It's kind of a BOGO, I guess you should say.
There you go.
Yeah, you get you get your ticket to win a car, plus you get a chance to see all these beautifully restored cars and just reminisce on some of them. Maybe your first car that you ever drove was there or something like that. Just incredible. So it's a great event. Looking forward to it as always, Kerry.
Yeah, that's good. Get your tickets today, 321-473-7770, 321-473-7770. That's our show today. See you next Wednesday.